Hi guys, and welcome back to Slice of Mike. Today I'm doing my February wrap-up. I read 8 books in the month of February, which is pretty good, and I will talk about each of them in turn. These are in no particular order, but let's get right into it. First, I read Mistborn: The Final Empire, which is the first book in the Mistborn trilogy by Brandon Sanderson. I read this for the Year of Cosmere, and I'm so glad I picked it up. I've never read anything by Brandon Sanderson except for Steelheart and The Rhythmatist, which I also read this month. So The Final Empire is about a fictional world where people can produce magical effects by consuming metals and burning them inside of their bodies. And the Final Empire is ruled over by the Lord Ruler, who's kind of a butthead and also immortal. So the people that live under him want to overthrow him, and that's kind of the plot of this book. I would recommend this to all fantasy fans. It was better than I expected, and probably the best epic fantasy I've read since Game of Thrones. I do have to mention, though, that I'm not into the design of this book. I hate mass markets, and the cover for this doesn't do anything for me. So if I do buy the second and third books, I'm going to be looking at the UK editions. If you haven't seen those, they're beautiful. So if you want to buy the series, I'd recommend just buying the UK box set. The next book I read was Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. This is the world's crustiest, I think a piece just fell off, the crustiest edition of Alice you will ever see in your life. This is just the first half of the commonly marketed duo, which is Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass. So I haven't read Through the Looking Glass yet, but I really enjoyed this. It turned out to be a really fun book. It reminded me a lot of the Fairyland series by Catherine M. Valenti, which is my favorite series ever. There's some clever wordplay in here. It's kind of a dark fantasy, and it's a really quick read, so I'd recommend it to everybody if you haven't read it yet. And I think what I'm going to do with this version, since it's kind of old and I'll probably get a new one, is just frame kind of the cover. I think that would be cool in like a white frame. And then there's some cool pages throughout with illustrations on them, so I might frame those as well. I think it's better to try and do something artistic with books that are falling apart, even if it fails, than just throw them in the garbage, because that would be tragic. The next book I read in February was A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab, and this was my favorite book that I read last month. I have done a review video for this, so if you'd like to hear more about that, I will link that in the description below. I will say that this is a very good book. It's one of the best urban fantasies I've read in a long time, and I had never heard of the author before joining BookTube, so thank you, BookTube. Next, I read Red Rising and Golden Sun by Pierce Brown. February was actually a really good reading month for me. I also really enjoyed these two books, so I'd recommend them to everyone. This series is about a futuristic society separated by color, and there's some sort of dystopian elements there. It's very reminiscent of Game of Thrones and The Hunger Games, but it's the best of those books. I did a separate review for Red Rising, so I will link that in the description below. I didn't review Golden Sun, basically because I read this. This is the first book I read in February. I forgot everything that happened, and it just wouldn't have been a very good video, so we're not going to have one for that, but there is one for this if you're interested in hearing more about that series. The next book I read in February was The Rhythmatist by Brandon Sanderson. This is a middle grade fiction book about a boy who lives in alternative United States, and there's a magic system that uses chalk and chalklings, which are creatures made out of magic. It's pretty weird. It takes place at a school, so the setting was similar to Hogwarts, but it's also highly original, and I'd recommend this for anybody who's interested in a lighter fantasy series. This is the first book, and the next book comes out, I think, next year. Possibly? I don't know. The next book I saved intentionally for last because it was a bit of a disappointment for me, and I wanted to talk about that a little bit, and that is Red Queen by Victoria Aveyard. This is a book that has been getting a lot of hype and also very divisive reviews. Some people hate it and some people love it. I'm a little bit in between. I thought it was an interesting story and it had a few interesting elements, but it wasn't a very original book for me. It reminded me a lot of other YA dystopian series I have read before, and not in a good way. So I did a separate review video for this. If you're interested in hearing more about my thoughts on that, I will link it down below. And yeah, it just wasn't really as cool as I thought it would be, unfortunately. So that's it for everything I read in February. Let's get into my March TBR. First on my list is Seraphina by Rachel Hartman. This is the first book in some trilogy about dragons, I don't know what it's called. I keep trying to finish this book, but more books creep into my TBR as always, and that's why I don't read multiple books at once, because some poor little book always falls by the wayside, and Seraphina, I'm sorry to do that to you, but I will definitely finish this book in March. So far I'm enjoying it, so more on this book later. The next book I'm reading in March is A Game of Thrones by George R. R. Martin. I've already read this book, actually. I've read the entire series. I'm rereading it as part of the GOT read-along, which is helmed by Marie over at Snark Squad. I've been wanting to reread the series for a while, mainly because the next book isn't coming out for a long time yet, and I have to distract myself in some way, and they're also really good books, and there's so much material in here that you forget a lot of what happens. I think it'll be fun to reread the books and meet some of the characters again who don't live past the first book, or the second book for that matter. Also in March, I'm doing a buddy read with Alexis at Shelf Life Extension, and we're reading Cress by Marissa Meyer. I've read the first 2 books in that series, plus Fairest, which is kind of the prequel. I'm a little surprised I haven't read Cress yet, mostly because I loved the first 2 books, but I think I just got distracted by other things, and I'm definitely going to read it this month. for sure. I'm also doing a buddy read with Monica at Soph Blueberry, and we're reading The Bees by Laline Paull, which reminds me a lot of Animal Farm from what I can tell from the synopsis. It's about a hive of bees that undergoes some sort of revolution. And like I mentioned in my wrap-up, I'm planning on reading the second book in the Final Empire series by Brandon Sanderson, and that is The Well of Ascension. Don't have a copy yet because I don't want to buy an ugly mass-market paperback again, so we'll see what I can come up with. Hopefully I get the UK series. I'm really hoping. I also plan on reading The Princess Bride by William Goldman, which is what my book club is reading this month, and I've seen the movie. I didn't enjoy it as much as people thought I should have. I'm thinking I'll like it, but I don't know. I'm kind of up in the air on that one. I'm also going to read The Fire Sermon by Francesca Haig, which is the first in a dystopian series. I think it's going to be a series. So this book takes place in the future, and everybody's born with a twin. There's the Omega, who is twisted or deformed in some way, and there's the Alpha, who is perfect. And the Alphas live together in some great city, and the Omegas are left to fend for themselves. Some other booktubers have already read this book, and they've said it's pretty good, so I'm looking forward to it. It sounds a bit like The Road by Cormac McCarthy. I think it's going to be kind of a grim, dark, serious book. That is it for everything I've read in February and plan on reading in March. I'll be back on Friday with a book haul, so until then I hope you guys have a good week, and I will talk to you all later. Bye!